Welcome back, everyone. I hope you had a nice lunch. Now I want to give the word to Barbara and Nathalie, and they will talk about implementation of the new I definition. So please, Barbara and Nathalie.
Thank you. I hope everyone can hear me. Nathalie from Helsinki and myself from Copenhagen are going to tell you something about our experiences with implementing the new I definition. And we have, oh no, this is not working. Wait. That's funny. Now it's working. So we have divided this talk into 3 parts, and afterwards we'll have Mentimeter questions. I will first give you a short background about the topic, and then Nathalie will share the Helsinki experience, and then myself again the Copenhagen experience. And please also use the chat function if you have any questions, which we will then take together with the Mentimeter questions. So I'll start with a UCAST slide about the SIR, the old definitions. What you actually see here is the distribution of benzyl penicillin and pneumococci, and you can see in blue the wild type isolate population, so without acquired resistance, and then in red you see isolates with acquired resistance. But what we are now focusing at are the clinical categories: susceptible, intermediate, and resistant. And the old intermediate, the old I, the intermediate category, actually comprised several things. It covered over uncertain clinical effects. It also included uncertainty in the lab, technical uncertainty, which Annika just has had a very nice presentation about. So that is covered in the ATU now. And then the intermediate category always also included that you could be able to treat this bacteria with this antibiotic if you used a high dose, or if there was a concentration for pharmacokinetic reasons. And these 2 last ones is actually what the new I is about. So UCAST, after a long consultation process and discussion process, implemented the new I definition in 2019, with 2020 being a transition year, I think it was called. And as we all know, 2020 turned out to be a lot different than we all thought it would be. So that's why we still are talking about implementation of the new I in 2021. So the new I now means susceptible increased exposure, and we have 2 susceptible categories: S meaning susceptible normal exposure or normal dosage, and I meaning susceptible increased exposure. And the I in increased exposure is now what I stands for. The resistant category is unchanged. And if you have a deeper look into these definitions, so S is susceptible standard dosing regimen, and these are clinical breakpoints. So S susceptible stands for a high likelihood of therapeutic success, and then for S using the standard dosing regimen, and for I because the exposure to the agent is increased. And that can either be done by adjusting the dosing regimen or by its concentration at the site of the infection. The asterisks, which you see explained here in the bottom of the slide, gives you a little bit more details about this exposure, that adjusting the dosing regimen can affect the mode of administration, per oral versus intravenous, the dose of the individual single dose, the dosing interval, which can be changed, and then infusion time, extended infusion, or even continuous infusion. And then the concentration at the site of the infection will be because of distribution and excretion of the antibiotic. And there we are mainly talking about the urinary tract, where, for example, beta-lactams will concentrate and have higher concentrations. The resistant category translates to a high likelihood of therapeutic failure. You can find more information on the UCAST homepage under new definitions of S, I, and R, and there you can see, for example, you can find a 3-pager with information to clinical colleagues, an explanatory video. You can find a PowerPoint and a PDF presentation, and you can also find recordings of online seminars from 2020. And actually, we also had an online seminar in Nordicast. So on the Nordicast page on workshops and webinars, you can also find links to previous seminars, and there is a link to the November 2020 seminar on the new eye and ATU. So a little bit more background, clinical breakpoints relate to dosages, and these dosages you can find in the UCAST and Nordicast breakpoint table on the worksheet dosages, where you find a standard dosage and a high dosage column. So S relates to the standard dosage and I to the high dosage column. On the Nordicast page under breakpoints and dosages, you can also find these dosages worksheets as PDF file for the 3 different languages. So clinical breakpoints relate to dosage because they are set taking into account PK/PD, pharmacokinetics, and pharmacodynamics. And as you can see here, this is a curve for ceftazidime, one for 1 gram 3 times a day, and one for 500 milligrams 3 times a day. And you can see that you get a right shift when you use higher dosages, meaning you get a higher, a better effect, which is here the function of time above MIC, depending on the dosage. On the other hand, you've got wild type distributions for different species, which will look different. Here as an example, again, ceftazidime on the top, E. coli, and the bottom, Pseudomonas aeruginosa. And you can see that the E. coli wild type population has lower MSCs, is more susceptible for ceftazidime than the Pseudomonas aeruginosa wild type population, so the population without acquired resistance. And that leads to that an E. coli wild type can be treated with standard dosage of ceftazidime 1 gram 3 times a day, whereas Pseudomonas aeruginosa wild type isolates, an isolate of Pseudomonas aeruginosa without acquired resistance, will have to be treated with the high dosage of ceftazidime, which is 2 grams 3 times a day. So a Pseudomonas isolate, which isn't within the wild type, should be reported as I, susceptible increased exposure. And to show that in the breakpoint table, UCAST and Nordicast uses arbitrary off-scale breakpoints to categorize these wild types organisms as I, as susceptible increasing exposure where that is applicable. These arbitrary off-scale breakpoints are an MSCS breakpoint of S below or equals to 0.001 milligram per liter, and a zone diameter breakpoint of more or equal to 50 millimeters. If we have a look at the Pseudomonas Nordicast table here, you can see on the top of the breakpoint table, there's a general comment explaining these arbitrary off-scale breakpoints, which will not be covered by your measuring. So these are really arbitrary breakpoints. And you can see that Pseudomonas species for Piptazo and ceftazidime will always be reported I, never as I for the wild type, and then there may be acquired resistance, and they may shift over to the R population. If we then look at that again more graphically, this is again the distribution, MIC distribution of ceftazidime for Pseudomonas aeruginosa, and you have the ECOF, the upper limits of the wild type distribution of 8, and the clinical breakpoint, which has the arbitrary S breakpoint, and then the R breakpoint equaling the ECOF. So R is more than 8, are all MICs above 8. And then you can see that you will report the wild type population as I, and then you also have the R population. This new I, when you categorize wild type distributions, some wild type distributions as I, that has of course impact on surveillance of resistance. In the old days, for surveillance purposes, the I and the R category have often been taken together, been lumped, and that should not be done anymore. So for surveillance purposes, you should avoid lumping the categories. You should report them as I, S, I, and R separately. And if you have to combine, you should never combine I and R, only S and I. But ideally, not even that, but report each category for itself. And it can actually get even more complicated. Just a little example here with Klebsiella pneumoniae meropenem, where you've got the wild type distribution up to 0.125 and the clinical breakpoints of 2, or S equals or below 2, and R more than 8. So there you have actually an S category comprising both wild type isolates and acquired low resistance. Then we've got the I category covering the MIC 4 and 8, where you can treat with high dose meropenem, and then the R category. And this is just to show that it can actually get even more complicated. And from a Nordic point of view, where CPE is a rare phenomenon, surveillance is based on actually the resistance mechanism. But the main point from this slide here is that if you, for surveillance purposes, you should not lump I and R together anymore, which was done on the old days. And with these words, I give the word to Nathalie in Helsinki.
Thank you. Thank you, Barbara. So first of all, I would like to show you, Barbara, I think you have to, change the slides. So I would like to show you this map of Sweden. As you can see, in Sweden, almost all the labs have implemented already the new I category. So there is only 2 labs that have not yet implemented it. So in the next slide, I have a map from Finland that Heikki Ilma-Virta was doing, and it is there is probably some minor errors, but it gives you an idea that we still have this in process. So in the green, you have the center which has already implemented the new I category. And next, I will then focus on this south area, which is covered by HUSLab, where I'm actually working. So it comprises the Helsinki region and 2 smaller regions in the east part of Finland. So the first laboratory where we implemented the I category was in February, and then the rest of the area followed in May this year. Next. So how did we proceed in HUSLab? So first of all, we had a big brainstorming work to do. And then we list all the antibiotics that are answered in our laboratory and that could have an I category. We run additional statistics and simulation to evaluate how many strains will be implicated. We also work on the ATU and the possibilities that we have to solve them. We also had different options with the IT tools that we are using in the lab and work on the report models. And we compare UCAS dosage table with our local practices. So with all those lists, we end up with a list of problems that we definitely have to solve. So we had technical problems with ATU IT issues, and I'm not going further with that because ATU has been covered this morning, and IT issues are so specific to each laboratory that it will not help anybody if I explain all the problems we had. We had also technical problems with ESBL, and this is probably a Finland exception. And we end up with 3 different options on how to report the new I category. And of course, we have to choose which one will be the best. Dosages in Finland, we noticed that we had some discrepancy between the UCAS dosage table and our local antibiotic treatment guidelines. And this that must be discussed with our ID colleagues. And from the beginning, we also start to think that communication and training will be quite a big issue. And we start to list all the people that we have to reach, train, and give material that the new I category could be understood correctly. And we also started to think that we need to organize also a follow-up, and how could we do that? So about ESBL briefly, in Finland we have FIRE, which is an unofficial network of Finnish clinical microbiology laboratories, and it has until now worked as our NAC. FIRE has done some recommendation a long time ago about ESBL strains that if beta-lactam is asked, then you should report as an I. And the idea was to flag that the efficacy of those antibiotics are uncertain. So it was fitting in the old I definition, but not in the new one. Next. And next. So we had to get, in a way, rid of this recommendation. This recommendation has been removed since a couple of years, but it was still in use in our laboratory and, to my knowledge, in 4 other centers in Finland. And go to the UCAS recommendation that we have to answer ESBL as UCAS recommend, so as it is, and then add warning comments. Next. So how should we report this new I category, and some thought about the use of comments. So first here, I took 2 slides from a previous Nordic ASA workshop that we had last year in fall. The first one is on the left and is for Norway, and they have conducted a Gallup there and asked in the laboratory how they report the new I category. And as you can see, the majority has a standard comment. There is 1/4 that have individually tailored comments, and there is other options also which has been reported. And for instance, here they say that standard comments which is used sporadically, for instance, for Pseudomonas aeruginosa. On the right of the slide, there is an example for Sweden, for Stockholm, about Pseudomonas aeruginosa. So in the report, there is 2 different comments that said what I means. And for wild type, they decided at the beginning at least not to report the carbapenems. And they were hoping that the clinician were calling, and then they are going to explain what you should do and not do with that report. So this is 2 different things, how you can handle that. And for Helsinki, we had meetings with ID colleagues and also with FIRE, and we had, next slide, we had this type of report. So it's an E. coli from blood culture, and all tested antibiotics are susceptible. It's a wild type strain, and as you see, cefuroxime is an I. Next slide. So we had in the report 2 different comments, and next. So the first one is a dosage comment, and you have in the parentheses the children dosages, and then the second one is a general comment which gives the definition of the new I. Next. In addition of that, we had for Pseudomonas, a specific comment encouraging not to use meropenem nor tobramycin as first-line treatment. And for stenotrophomonas, we had a comment that encouraged the MD to contact ID colleagues before starting any antibiotic treatment. And we decided that for ESBL, we will follow UCAS recommendation and give up the FIRE recommendation. So in Finland, we don't have a national consensus on dosing, which is an issue. So we went through the UCAS dosage table with our ID colleagues, and we have done one where we have noticed in red the differences between what we had between UCAS and the local differences. And we had on the left part, sorry, it's in Finnish, but an introduction explaining the new definition of S, I, and R. And we have a chapter there which say that you have to consider individually each patient and take in notice that there could be differences between the patient depending on renal function or infection sites or severity of infections and so on. So you definitely have, before you prescribing your antibiotics, you consider everything. So next slide. This table has been included in our local antibiotic treatment guidelines. And it's also available to anyone in Finland on our web page of HUSLab. How did we organize the communication and the training? And for that, I have to say that we had a very good collaboration with the eastern part of Finland, which has implemented the new I at the same time that we were. So we first of all had an article with the FIRE. We written an article which explained the I definition, and we sent to our patient or our for all person which has previously registered a newsletter, and we sent 2 emails, 1 week before and 1 week after the changing in the lab, to all general practice centers and to all physicians working in general and university hospital. And we added a 6-minute recorded lecture which were explaining the changes. And this lecture was the same that in the eastern part of Finland. So all this material is available on our website, and of course the ID specialists have also in their own clinics related the information by mail or by doing some lectures. So next. We have also done quite a lot of training in the lab, of course, and also we had national meetings with FIRE about this new I category, and we went in different places and clinics to give some lectures. We also included in the medical student basic program a lecture about this regulation of the new I category. Next. So for the follow-up, we have regular meetings, feedback meetings with our ID physicians, and until now, it has been various experiencing depending on the wards. It has been easier apparently in medicine ward than in surgery. We had also differences between university hospital and general hospitals. We are looking regularly also at the consumption of antibiotics. So until now, but it has been only 4 months, there is no clear changing, but of course the follow-up will continue, and we will also have more detailed reports depending on clinic, because until now we have a general report only. And we had setting up a research project to look if there is any changing in the prescription practices, and particularly in dosing in our area before and after implementation of the new I. And we also plan more training sessions, and this is something that is very important. I think that it's not enough to give a lot of lecture and training at the beginning. It's something you have to go back many times and in many occasions. So it's an ongoing project, I would say. Thank you. That's all for me.
Thank you, Nathalie. Then I will continue with the Copenhagen experience. In Copenhagen, we implemented the new eye on the 1st of June this year, and the Copenhagen area, or the capital region of Denmark, has a little bit less than 2 million inhabitants and is served by 3 different departments of clinical microbiology. I'm working in one of them, Herlev, so what I'm giving here is the Herlev perspective. And I think the 4 keywords about the implementation in our region and in our hospitals are cooperation, our IT solutions, communication and education. And I'll go through this in the following slides. First of all, we developed this, what I call here a graphical abstract, what the new eye is about, where we use colors, the shift from the old eye with the color orange, close to R, to the new eye in the color light green, close to S. And we stressed that the old eye, the gamle I, comprised several different things, and the clinician, and actually also not the clinical microbiologist, would often at least not be sure what kind of eye it was. So in reality, it actually was a næsten R, nearly R, whereas the new eye has a narrower or is defined very well. It only covers one thing, which is susceptible increased exposure. So the definition has shifted to S ved rigtig dosering, or in English, susceptible at the dosage. That's right. And we have used that graphical abstract again and again in communication and education. So this implementation project was a cooperation between the 3 departments of clinical microbiology in the region, but also a cooperation with the responsibles for the regional antibiotic treatment guidelines, both the hospital guidelines and also the primary care guidelines. We also had a close cooperation with a laboratory information system expert in our region, which helped us finding the right IT solutions. And then, of course, we we took this up again and again in our own departments, so with the local clinical microbiologists and also with local clinicians. For IT solutions, we started out saying we want this to work automatically. So we do only want automatic comments on our reports and no manual process being involved. And that was because we thought manual processes would be time consuming and also prone to errors. So what we ended up is this view here, which is a wild type isolate E. coli in the urine. And what we do is we use a color code, the same color code as in this graphical abstract I just showed you. This is the view in the National Microbiology Database, NIBA, which is the one where most of our clinicians look at the results. So we used the same color code as in the dark green, I in the light green, and then R will be in red. And this color code was actually, or these colors on the report was actually inspired by a German a short report in GCM about the new eye. Then on our report also, the clinician will find the legend, which explains what S, I, and R mean, and a general comment, which is shown on all susceptibility reports, and that reads that the I now means susceptible increased exposure, and both S and I means susceptible and are both equally effective if antibiotics reported I are used at a high dosage, and then a reference to the dosage table in the regional antibiotic guideline. We really wanted to have a hyperlink to the dosage table directly from the reports, but unfortunately that was technically not feasible. As Nathalie also stressed, communication is of course a big part of this implementation, and communication even with the regional communication department is not always easy, but we managed to get some news out, which was pushed out to all intranets of the different hospitals in the region about this new eye. We also have information available on our internet homepages, which are can be seen by general practitioners and have used our newsletter systems for general practitioners. And then, of course, we've had mails to the hospital's clinical departments, which we followed up upon. The educational process during the implementation was, in our department, we had several educational sessions with the clinical microbiologists, and we made 3-pager information that we actually made regional for clinical microbiologists, getting phone calls and being consulted about the new eye. We educated, of course, our laboratory technicians and also our secretaries, which actually answer a lot of telephone calls in our department. For education of clinicians, we made some presentations ranging from the ultra short one, which is 5 minutes for surgeons, up to 45 minutes for intensive care specialists and infectious disease specialists. I counted, and that might not be 100% precise, but as far as I could see, we had 23 presentations in our 4 hospitals, and we are following up with presentations in some of these departments, which wanted to have a follow-up in this autumn. So, to sum up the evaluation of this implementation process, I think it was really the coordination of many parts and details, and it led to a very, very nice collaboration between the 3 regional departments of clinical microbiology. So if Lilian Süß from Blanc and or Christian Schöning from Brest Hospitale is listening, thank you very much for this really, really nice collaboration. And I think it was important to acknowledge the interaction between susceptibility reports and the antibiotic treatment guidelines, which really has led to that we have a better interaction there, and actually Lilian and mine now being involved into in these antibiotic treatment guidelines. I think we managed to take this implementation as an opportunity to be more visible as clinical microbiologists in clinical departments and to focus on the importance of dosages. The fact that one size does not fit all, and a side effect of that being also focusing on dosing adjustment for renal impairment and overweight. But I also want to stress that, of course, we have not reached all. We have not talked to all clinicians, and it is and will be important to evaluate and follow up this autumn. And by this, I think the presentation is finished, and I'll stop sharing and give the screen to Ulrich for the Mentimeter questions. So the first question is an easy one, if you're orientated in time and space. The question is, have you implemented the new eye category in your lab? And you can choose yes in 2021 or yes in 2020, or not yet, but you are going to or you have not and will not implement. And if you don't know what the new I category is, then you may choose option 5. I think we'll wait a little bit longer. It's 70 out of 170. So people answering. Yeah, should we see the results? All right. So many have implemented in 2020 and also many in 2021, and 8 labs or 8 people are working in labs which are on the way. Yeah, I think that is fine. Let's go to the next question. So the next question is, which of the following statements is right? The I category may include wild-type isolates, and or here several answers are possible. The I category may include isolates with acquired resistance, and or the I category should not be grouped together with R for surveillance. I can see Ulrich has set a time now, so we'll wait another 20 seconds. And now I think we can just see the results. So I don't think I made the point too clear then, because actually what is right are all of the 3 answers. The I category can include wild-type isolates. That is the case, for example, for Pseudomonas and Piptasia and Ceftazidime, where the wild-type requires treatment with the high dosage. The I category may also include isolates with acquired resistance, and an example for that would be benzyl penicillin and pneumococci, where you've got an I category where you can, if it's not meningitis, treat with high dosage benzyl penicillin. Another example would be acquired meropenem resistance in Enterobacterialis, where we've got where we've got an I category in which you can treat with high dosage meropenem, which you usually will combine with another agent. And the I category for the last question, the one shown in green here, should not be grouped or lumped together with R for surveillance, and that is because it both includes, it can also include wild-type isolates. So here, all 3 of the answers would be correct. I think Nathalie is taking then the 3rd Mentimeter question.
Yes. So the question is, which tools do you use for clarification of the new I on your reports? So the first answer is general comment, specific comment, colors, link to dosage table, or other tools. and you have multiple choice possible, and there is no wrong answer in this one, so just relax and vote freely.
So while there is a vote here, I can see that Jørn has put out a question, Jørn from Norway, about haven't anybody used the antibiotic stewardship teams / programs for, I guess it's for getting these views out.
Well, I can answer from the Copenhagen perspective. Well, the antibiotic stewardship teams are the ones also responsible for the regional treatment guidelines. So in that sense, yes, they have been involved, of course.
And for Helsinki, it's the same answer, actually. So the vote is closed, isn't it? So a majority are using a general comment, probably explaining what the new I definition is. And then some are using colors. I think it's very, very interesting because in Helsinki and in Huslab, we do not have this opportunity. And I think it was a very elegant way to report what you show, Barbara. So I'm very envious of that. So it's interesting. And also that some could have link to the dosage table is also something which is very valuable, but unfortunately is not always possible. At least for us, it was not an option. And also 1/3 of the participants, or no, not that much, but some are using also specific commands. So interesting to see. Do you have further comment, Barbara, on that?
No, that's fine.
So next one and last one. Which of the following statements do apply in your lab about implementation of the new I definition? So first, after implementation, no increased workload in the lab. Second, new collaborations with clinicians. The third, evaluation should include surveillance of prescribing patterns. And the last one, a good experience. And now the vote has started. People are clearly tired because there is less votes than at the beginning. Okay, so can we have the results? So yeah, it's nice to see that after implementation, there is no increased workload in the lab. So we had the same experience in Helsinki. It doesn't really add workload since it has been implemented. And new collaboration with clinicians, I think, is very important, and I agree. It has been very interesting to do the work. And yeah, I'm also glad that many has planned to make some surveillance of prescribing patterns, because I think we should in the lab also think of that, what will be the impact, and it's very nice that people are planning to follow what will be the results of the implementation of the new I. And also I'm pleased to see that some of you I think that it has been a good experience, that it's not always something difficult and impossible to solve. I think we have done now all the questions. Yeah.
And I also think we're just on time. So